Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Climax's channel, a carbon exploration company that can access and develop the highest quality forestry and marine carbon sequestration projects. Joining us to discuss it, James, the Chief Executive Officer, is going to take us through the investor deck today, give us that high-level overview of the company. So first and foremost, welcome back, sir.
Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to get you on. So I'm going to let you take the reins here. You can pull up the investor slide deck and just take us through it and break this down in the pieces for us.
No problem at all. And thanks for the opportunity to speak to you again. As I said last time, we're a mission-focused company. We really believe that the private sector can play a key role in addressing this problem of climate change on a very large scale. We believe very firmly it's a tractable and solvable problem. And we've been dedicating the last, for some of us, 15 years of our lives to figure out how to do this well. And we built Klimat as a platform to mobilize capital at scale. We built it in the public markets because that's where the best reporting and accounting standards are. We genuinely believe this is a new commodity that's going to change the way and the path of civilization in addressing climate change. And this is something that's part of our kind of founding approach and what we fundamentally believe in as a company. So to just sort of summarize where we came from, what our goals are, the first thing is increasing demand. We believe that along with Mark Carney and McKinsey and many other people, that the companies that have made net zero commitments are going to create something like $30 billion of demand by the year 2030. We're expecting to see that demand rise 15-fold and then a further potential 6-fold growth in demand for carbon credits by 2050. And ultimately, that's been based on looking at all the companies in the world that have made net zero commitments, working out what supply looks like right now and saying, through a very detailed study, how much demand is going to come from companies that can reduce their emissions, can do the right thing, can change technologies, but ultimately to get to net zero, they have to buy credits. They have to make these investments in these projects. We're a credit producer. We're not a royalty company or a streaming company or an intermediate company or financer. We're an owner-operator of our assets. And we believe that's really important because we have to have that level of control. We use our equity to develop and de-risk these projects to a scale where we can talk to purchasers. Those purchasers will give us capital up front before we even plant the trees or protect the areas on a pre-purchase agreement. We're in the final stages of negotiating those agreements, and we have an announcement that's gone out this week related to the first big transaction. The third part is we like to find long-term partners, long-term buyers for our projects. We like this kind of optionality. As a smaller company relative to the size of our buyers, who are all often Fortune 500 companies, partnering with them as key suppliers, giving them optionality around being able to buy an entire country of credits from us is very, very important. And then ultimately, the sector has had lots of very small scale projects in the past, a few thousand hectares at a time. We believe that to get to that $30 billion market, you've got to work with whole countries and whole jurisdictions, national and subnational level. So you'll see in our deck and in our materials, we work with entire chiefdoms within Sierra Leone. We work at the national level there. We work in Suriname and Mexico at the national and subnational level with the key developers there. And we get the same kind of concession that oil and gas companies used to get for drilling oil, except we're getting these kinds of agreements for developing carbon projects with government and large landowners as the partners. So I'll walk you through and share with you some of the sort of highlights from those projects. Tons of material on our website and videos and things that give you much more sort of nuance and granularity around the projects. So, summarize the problem. There's 8 to 12 gigatons of carbon emissions reductions that could come from credits. We're at about 40 gigatons, so 40 billion tons of emissions right now. We need to reduce emissions by at least 15 billion tons to stabilize at 2 degrees centigrade. 75+% of those tons are in 7 countries around the world, like DRC and Colombia and Mexico, places where we're active. We believe that investing in preventing and reversing deforestation is the fastest path to at least achieve the first part of those emissions reductions. What we know is the market is supply constrained right now, and we're one of the largest players in terms of developing those projects. We see huge potential in terms of credit production. We have 60,000 hectares in Sierra Leone that we can reforest. And ultimately, we've just run out of patience with governments promising tens of billions of dollars of buying from the Paris Agreement. when we see large corporations that, to their credit, are trying to do the right thing for their shareholders and their customers and address climate change. Companies like Amazon through AWS is going carbon neutral. Netflix, Nestle, all of these companies that sell products that we as consumers buy every day are trying to make our lives easier, trying to help us do the right thing by approaching net zero. We just believe fundamentally that private markets, private purchasing by these large corporates will have far more impact than the Paris Agreement has had over the years and has been promising, solutions that have just never been realized. And then ultimately, from a retail investor's perspective, you don't usually get to participate in these kinds of investments. Impact investing and carbon investing, the majority of the other players are large private equity funds or term limited funds around the world that are for wealthy investors. And we believe that the reason this is interesting to retail investors is there are very few opportunities, if any, around the world to participate, to invest your capital in a way from an ESG perspective where it's going to have that kind of positive impact. And that's, we're very passionate about that. We're very passionate about democratizing these kinds of solutions to climate change. And that's part of the reason we're speaking in this forum. So the solution is focused on nature-based solutions, focused on reforestation, avoided deforestation, mangrove restoration, because that's 65 to 85% of the global potential. Very simple terms, if we stopped and reversed deforestation globally now across as few as 10 different countries, we could reduce global emissions by 25 to 40%. And just take a moment to take that in. There is no other technology on the planet right now, or no other intervention that across 8 to 10 different jurisdictions could reduce the planet's human emissions on the planet by 25 to 40%. It's a staggering statistic. It's well grounded in all of the research and in all of the publications around this. This is a tractable, solvable problem. We work in jurisdictions where we can have a big impact through our capital, particularly in emerging markets. It also happens to be that in tropical countries, trees grow 3 times faster, so it makes sense to put our money there. I've been doing this for 16 years. Our technical team at Sylvestrum has been working on this for 20 years plus. Even within Sierra Leone, Kev Goldington, who runs our African operations, has been in country now for 18 years. He built the largest sustainable palm oil plantation in Africa, and knows how to solve problems within that. And then we design our projects to look a lot like the kinds of projects that energy analysts in public markets would be used to looking at. We're trying to make them as easily financeable as possible. So when our term sheets show up and some of the big investment groups and some of the biggest banks in the world look at them, they'll be templates that are familiar and easier for them to process. Precedent transactions, there's been some huge transactions in the last couple of years in this space. I was involved in the Great Bear Rainforest, which is 6.4 million hectares of protection in central and northern BC that involved indigenous people for the first time in a completely novel way and structure. I was also involved in the Mai-Ndombe project in the Congo in 2012 that produced protected 300,000 hectares of land. In the last couple of years, Delta Blue Carbon in Sindh province in Pakistan protected 350,000 hectares, will generate 140 million credits over the lifespan of the project. Wildlife Works, who I've worked with a lot in the past, has secured projects and financing for over $200 million. The difference with us and the partners behind this is we're public. We're in more jurisdictions. We're probably at a larger scale. We're in places like Pakistan already, in discussions in Baluchistan. But the precedent transactions, it's not like we'd be the first people to do this. We're just the first to do it at scale in the context of public markets. In the context of our development, this is how it generally works. We'll start in a jurisdiction, negotiate access and revenue sharing agreements with landowners and government upfront, so everyone knows where they stand. The mistake so many other developers has made is developing projects to a stage, flying below the radar, ignoring government. And as we've seen in Indonesia in the last year, at some point the government turns around and says, where's our share? What's our share of this transaction? Where are our taxes? Where are our revenue sharing agreements? We deal with all of that up front and take that risk off the table. And then within 6 months, as we've seen in Sierra Leone, we have a feasibility project. We know how many tons the project's going to produce, and we have full costing and a carbon reserve statement in place. And then we go and talk to big buyers. We go and talk to our off-takers. You know, if you're building, the analogy is if you're building an LNG plant in northern BC, like companies like Shell are doing right now, you don't build it and then wonder at the end if you're going to be able to sell the LNG. You write those contracts in advance and agreements in advance, and we do exactly the same thing with carbon credits. We talk to the largest emitters and trading houses in the world. We have 16 different wholesale buyers in our network, and we say to them, okay, which one of you is going to offer us the best pre-purchase price to secure these tons? And they're all so desperate for credits right now. We're getting agreements and signing agreements that give us access to that capital before we even sort of activate and ramp up the full planting process. We planted 400 hectares in Sierra Leone last year. We'll plant 1,000 this year, and the purchases will cover most or all of the capex on that. And then within 18 months to 2 years for tree planting projects, you get the first credits produced. For conservation projects like our mangrove project, within the next 6 to 12 months, we could have the first credit production, because as soon as we prevent those trees from being cut down, we can generate those credits. Typical project strategy, we like large-scale projects, 20,000 hectares minimum, ideally, for forestry projects. We do reforestation, red and blue carbon projects. All of these are about protecting and enhancing natural systems. You know, if you look at how much carbon photosynthesis removes from the atmosphere every year, it's about 130 billion tons. Our total emissions annually are about 40 billion tons. So if we use photosynthesis to do a job that no technology has been able to do, we can generate these credits at scale. In terms of the project portfolio, lots more detail available on these in the site and videos from the project sites. But in Sierra Leone, for our rewilding project, which is replanting native species, we have 25,000 hectares underway. We have a further 32,000 hectares of credits of land, in a separate kingdom in another part of Sierra Leone that we've purchased the options for. So 60,000 hectares of replanting. That's 60,000 soccer fields of forestry replanting within that region. You know, somewhere in that project, around 13 to 14 million tons of credits as the minimum. In Sierra Leone mangroves, we've got 8 to 10,000 hectares now that we've identified. We could see up to 5 million tons of carbon credit production from that very quickly, very quickly out of the gate. And then in Yucatan, we have something like now 25,000 hectares identified for restoration work, where the government has allowed roads to be built around the waterfront. That's killed off the mangroves. We can restore tidal flows and very quickly see those areas return to producing both biodiverse habitat, but also carbon credits very, very quickly. And then we have projects under development signed in places like Suriname, where we have a government agreement in the final stages of approval. In Balochistan and Pakistan, we're prospecting for new projects in Liberia, just to the south of Sierra Leone. We're very, very active in developing a pipeline that should get us, you know, we've got 30 million tons under development here. I expect we'll be closer to 50 or 60 million tons within the next few months. Just some images here from each of the project sites. This is the coastline of Sierra Leone. Bottom left is a picture we took in Yucatan, and we've got a drone video that we'll be sharing later this week. And then in Guyana, our agroforestry projects. In terms of achievements to date, we've got reforestation rights now to 57,000 hectares. We secured that late last year. We planted 400 hectares of trees. Very few carbon companies have moved as quickly as we have to just get boots on the ground and learn the lessons about how you do these projects, how you implement them effectively. In the last 6 months, we've also secured up to 10,000 hectares of mangrove projects and have completed most of the phases of PDD development, which is the sort of audit. In Yucatan, we've identified up to 40,000 hectares of degraded mangrove. We've got sort of our arms wrapped around 25,000 hectares. We have a local science team from the National University and are finalizing negotiations with the federal government to expand on the agreement we have with the state government, which was signed almost 18 months ago. Guyana, we have a fully operating coconut plantation that produces coconut water while also restoring degraded land. Coconut water in and of itself is a fast-growing area. We benefit from the revenues from that project and also have a platform for our expanded operations within within that country. Within our original 3-month goals for this period, we've hit all of these goals. We now have the term sheet for the first offtake from our Sierra Leone project finalized, and we're in the final process of doing the full legal agreements for that. We've completed feasibility studies in Sierra Leone for forest and mangrove in the late stages of that work. So we know, close to 500 tons per hectare from all the land that we protect within that area. And we'll be shortly announcing 2 new jurisdictional agreements and relationships with 3 new global organizations. And then discussions underway with funding agencies like IFC, MEGA within the World Bank for risk management. Like we're moving fast. We're a plucky startup, but we're also very serious about how we engage with these funders. Last couple of points, we have an outstanding board. We have a mix of people like Celia, who's come from Earthshot Labs and Terraformation, who's a passionate advocate for nature-based solutions and founded one of the first large networks of forest carbon organizations. Abiomi Makindjinde, who's one of the most experienced resource sector lawyers working in Africa, based out of London, absolutely world-class individual who is present in a lot of our meetings and a critical advisor. Neil Passmore, who's the founding CEO of PTHL Guyana and Hanema Partners in the UK. Paul Matizek from Lithium X and a number of other very successful ventures who brings that public market experience. And then Bob Cross, who's Standard Lithium and huge depth of experience in public markets and also resource sector management. And then within our executive team, myself, Matt Romer, highly experienced CFO with public markets background who joined us late last year. Kev Godlington, head of African operations, who's been in Sierra Leone now for almost 20 years, ex-British military, involved in the peacekeeping missions within Sierra Leone, and then recognize that the way that you keep the peace after civil war in places is giving young people alternatives to picking up guns and weapons and building, great economic opportunities in these deprived areas, and has been transformative in terms of the work that he's done in that region. So I feel incredibly lucky that we have a world-class board of this type, and just constantly amazed by the progress our team's been able to make over the last less than 12 months since we listed.
Well, on that note, I definitely appreciate these insights today and kind of just walking us through this. And at this point, I definitely got to pass a question off to the viewers. We'd love to know what you think about this in that comment section below, and definitely consider subscribing, because as news comes down the wire, as we kind of further uncover what's going on with Klimax, we're going to obviously update you here. But on that note, as always, we look forward to catching you in the next one.
Thanks so much.